5 video games, 4 of which I have not talked about before, 1 new board game acquired, and 10 board games played, 2 of which were new to me. I'm Josh, and I'm really glad you're here with me because I have a bunch of games to talk about that I played in the month of May. We're going to start out with the video games, going in order of most hours played to the fewest hours played. The one I'm going to start with is one that I've already talked about probably too much on my channel, so I'm going to give a really brief update and then hopefully be able to leave that one behind until I eventually finish it at some point. Then I can give kind of a final update on it. But I just want to briefly mention Assassin's Creed Odyssey again, which I now have over 200 hours into this game. I had previously mentioned how my rating of the game had started off at a 9.5 out of 10. It had dropped to an 8.5, then a 7.5, and I'm just here to say that the roller coaster is now on the upswing, and my rating is back up to an 8 out of 10, and I just had to bump it up just because of how good the game design is from the perspective of anyone who's interested in historical ancient Greece and ancient Greek mythology. Plus the quality of the story. So the way they've kind of taken all this history and mythology and made this really elaborate story around this very long game is just really well done, despite the repetitiveness of the gameplay. So that's why I bumped it up to an 8 out of 10. It's always been quite a high rating. Even 7.5 out of 10 is a good rating. But yeah, I still think pretty highly of the game, even though it is repetitive and too long. Moving on then to the new to me games are a video game called Gran Turismo 5 that I'm about 8 hours into at this point. So a little while back I acquired a free PS3, and Gran Turismo 5 is the game that I've been messing around with the most on it so far. The reason is mostly because the two types of games that I am really interested in playing, those being racing games and World War I and World War II flying games, my gaming laptop can't really handle, so I've been happy to play Gran Turismo 5 on the PlayStation 3, and you know, it's a fairly basic racing game so far, and it does feel a little bit old. I'll have to look up when it came out, but it shows its age to a certain extent, though to be honest I don't have a lot to compare it to. It's not like I've been playing any racing games in recent years other than the occasional game of Mario Kart, but it's been fun to scratch that racing itch, like I said, that I've been unable to do on my gaming laptop just because of the system requirements of these kind of higher end racing games that require a lot of, I guess, probably pretty high end video cards and all of that stuff. So Gran Turismo 5, at this point I give it an initial rating of 7 out of 10. It's been fun to mess around with. My next most played game is going to be Kingdoms and Castles, a game I'm about 6 hours into. Now, I mentioned last month that I was playing a little bit of a game called Against the Storm, which is a city building game, and I was finding it a little bit complicated to get into. When I saw Kingdoms and Castles, it seemed like it might be a much more simplistic and easier to get into game, and initially that's what it did seem like. So it really gave me this pretty chill city building game vibes that had kind of fun cartoony graphics and really minimal danger associated with building your city. Yes, there was an occasional dragon that flew over and breathed fire on a couple of your buildings, and every so often a Viking raid would hit your city. A couple of Viking longships would show up and the Vikings would again burn a couple of buildings and then move on again. But the damage was minimal and easily fixed, so the danger aspect of the game was not really one that you really had to worry too much about, which gave it these kind of chill vibes. However, as my city grew and I got more into the game, I ran into a bit of frustration because the cool buildings are unlocked by gaining a lot of gold, and to gain gold you really have to tax your population. That's really the only way to gain gold as far as I can tell so far. But in order to tax your people, that's going to make them unhappy, so you have to do things that make them happy, like build certain buildings and acquire certain professions that allow the people to be happy. But in order to hire people to do those things, you need gold to pay the people that do the jobs that make your people happy. So it eats into your gold supply. So then you need an even bigger population. And then you become focused on this balance of creating enough food versus creating enough entertainment to keep your people happy and fed and make the population bigger, to get enough taxes, to get the cool buildings going. And it really feels like you need to build a very large and perfectly balanced city in order to unlock the cool stuff and build this really neat city, which becomes very tricky and technical to get that balance just perfect, the exact right ratio of all these many different building types. So once things start getting big, it becomes a little bit frustrating in my experience. I've given this game an initial rating of 6 out of 10. I'm not sure if I'll continue to fiddle around with it or not. We'll have to see how things go. The next one is a game that I only have 3 hours into, and it's a really cool little game called Aviassembly. Now, this is a very, very specifically interesting game for people who are into aviation. And I guess the name Aviassembly kind of gives that impression, I hope. But essentially, as soon as you load the game, you are given a bunch of basic airplane parts and you have to construct your own airplane. Then, if you've hopefully done that properly, you then take your airplane out on the runway, you take off, and then you start this very basic pick up and deliver where you have to hop to a short flight to a neighboring airport, pick up some supplies, deliver it back to another airport, which will give you a bit of money. And as you do these little flights to deliver supplies, you're going to build up this money and resources, which will allow you to purchase upgrades for your aircraft. Then you can go back to your garage and get these upgraded components, not opponents, and build a better, more powerful airplane, which will allow you to fly farther, pick up heavier things for more money, and in that way gradually build up your aircraft and work through this series of missions that you have to do. So it's really quite fun. The actual flying physics are not as realistic as I might like them to be. They're relatively basic and cartoony, but it is definitely a simple, fun time for fans of aviation. I see myself playing around with this some more. I think I'm certainly eager to get into some more interesting aircraft and see what happens there. It's a little bit tricky, though, to be honest with you, to build an airplane that can hold enough fuel to get where you need to go and carry enough supplies that you need to pick up in order to complete your missions, while at the same time having an airplane that can physically fly and isn't too heavy and that sort of thing. I've certainly built 1 or 2 aircraft where I could barely get it off the runway and then I crash into the hills and have to go back to the drawing board again and take off some of the load and balance these various issues with it. But it's a pretty cool little game for people who enjoy flying around in an aircraft. The final video game I'm going to talk about is a little game called River Towns that I've only got about 2 hours into. This looks like a great game for people who are very much into polyomino shapes in their board gaming. So people who like tile laying with different funky Tetris type shapes. River Towns looked right up my alley in terms of those mechanisms. However, what I discovered when I started to play the game is that it's just way too easy and there's really nothing to it. In fact, most of the maps that I played, so each time you complete a map you move on to the next map, and there might be 1 or 2 minor twists of what you have to do in terms of building your city. But what I found is I was getting pretty much perfect scores the first time I played each of the maps almost every time, except for if I got really unlucky with the random building draws, the shapes of the tiles that I was drawing. Every so often I would get unlucky with how they came out, which would mean I didn't get a perfect score, and if I replayed the game, typically I would then get the perfect score. So while it is just a very relaxing place tiles, do well, move on type of game, it does get, in my experience, boring pretty quickly. Even after just 2 hours of gameplay, I'm like, okay, this is too much on the easy chill balance in terms of not providing really any kind of challenge other than you're just in a pretty simple manner, placing these shapes, making your city, and moving onwards. So unfortunately, River Towns is only getting a 4.5 out of 10 on my first impression score, and I really don't think I'm going to be coming back to that game again. So moving on to the board games, the one new game I acquired was given to me by my friend Mark, who I've done a lot of Magic the Gathering play in the past with. And after I was recovering from my cancer surgery, he very kindly gave me this little game that's called the Fellowship of the Ring trick-taking game. And I was really interested in the game, partly because the art style really appealed to me when I saw images of the game on BoardGameGeek. You can kind of see already the box has this cool little foil color shine to it, but then the artwork, as you'll see when I put up some images, is this pretty cool stained glass-ish style, very stylized. Some of the characters are pretty obviously copies of the film characters, some aren't, which is a little bit weird, but for the most part the art style is pretty neat. Now what this is specifically a cooperative trick-taking game that takes you through a whole series of chapters in a 18-game campaign, and these chapters follow these steps of the Fellowship of the Ring book. So you start off in chapter 1 at Bilbo's birthday party. It gives you a couple of characters, it gives you a little mission to accomplish, and then once you do that, you move on to the next one, and so on through the course of 18 different missions here. So it's pretty cool in that respect. Each of the characters that comes into play has their own win condition, so you are cooperatively trying to play the game such that each of the characters achieves their win conditions, whether it's winning a certain number of tricks or even losing tricks or gaining certain cards and that sort of thing. And so it's a good game, it's well made, it's well designed. In May, I only played the first 2 chapters, so Mark and I won the first mission and we lost the second one, so there's a ton of game left to explore. And spoiler alert, when it comes to the games played in June, I am going to come back to this game, but I will say that it does play okay with 2 players, but I think it would be most ideal with 3 or 4 players playing together, because in the 2-player game they have to shoehorn in this kind of third player that is openly played cooperatively with the other 2 players, so that there is a third character in play, and the 2 human players have to incorporate that third player into their play. So it's even the 2-player game is played as a 3-player game, so that's why I say it's not ideal with 2 players, although it works okay. It certainly plays well with just 2. I think it would just be better with 3 or 4. Overall, I'm going to say that I'm not a huge fan of trick-taking card games in my very limited experience with the genre. I did really love, way back in the day, playing euchre, when I basically had a partner that I could partner up with and play against another couple, all of whom were very familiar with the game and how the game works and how the partnership dynamics worked. That was a super fun experience. I really enjoyed euchre back then. I haven't done a ton of other trick-taking stuff. I have played Fox and the Forest Duet, which is another cooperative 2-player specifically trick-taking game that I thought was quite clever and well done. So I give this game a 6.5 out of 10. It's a fun little game to just pull off the shelf, just quickly dive into, knock off a game or 3, and the barrier of entry to get into the game is pretty low. So I will say it's a fun time. It's not a favorite though. Moving on now to a game I have only played one time before, I think, and that is Azul. So my older son, Evan, has been having his grade 9 friends over for sleepovers pretty much every other weekend here, and they do have 1 or 2 board gamers in their group, although they mostly seem to be D&D and Magic players, but a couple of them are into board games, and one of them brought along his copy of Azul. So I played this with Evan and 2 of his friends, and it was a bit of a rough play because the guy who owned the game didn't quite recall exactly how all the scoring worked, and it had been too long since I had played the one game of it to remember exactly how it works too. But we sort of muddled through it, and it was fun to play with my older son Evan and his friends, and it was really nice that they invited me to play the game with them. Azul was a game I rate 7 out of 10. It's fun. It's not a favorite, but I enjoy it. When I've played it in the past with Paul, he's also rated it 7 out of 10. I was speaking about pick up and deliver games when I was talking about that Aviassembly game, and here's another really fun, very small board game called the Great Heartland Hauling Company that is completely built around this idea of picking up and delivering stuff and using some of the money you make to upgrade your truck, but generally just trying to race to get to a certain score and be the winner by reaching the score first. So it's a very tiny, very portable game, very easy to get into. It's been a long time since I played, so I was really happy and excited to play this 2-player with Paul. And the game we played had a pretty interesting ebb and flow where Paul got off to a pretty good lead while I fell behind early in the game. But then as the game progressed, Paul started to lag and I gained momentum and managed to pull ahead for the win. And I think that's partly due to the fact that I went for a tech upgrade for my truck pretty early, and that's kind of what slowed down my initial progress, but that upgrade allowed me to then get a better momentum going and pull off the victory. It's a really fun game. I rate the game 7.5 out of 10. In the distant past when we had played it, Paul had given it an 8 out of 10. Now he considers it to be more of about a 7.5 out of 10, so basically same rating as me. Both of us think it's a pretty good game. The next one is one that was super exciting because this is a new to me game. I sort of picked up for myself for my birthday a game called A Gest of Robin Hood. And this is a specifically 2-player game that falls within a category of games called the Irregular Conflict series that, as far as I understand, is sort of a subgenre of the Coin series of games. Coin standing for counterinsurgency. And whereas the Coin games tend to be very big, complex, very long, multiplayer games, Gest of Robin Hood strips that down to a 2-player, much quicker and easier play experience. You essentially have a very asymmetrical game where one player is playing Robin Hood, trying to get the various parishes around Nottingham to revolt against the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the other player is playing as the Sheriff, trying to keep order and to keep control of the parishes and try to stymie Robin Hood's progress. So I got to play this with my youngest brother because he was really kind enough to drive here from where he lives an hour away to basically do a gaming day for my birthday. So this is the main event of that day that we got played. Now, it's still a relatively complex game. I had to sit down before we played and put together my own player reference sheets so that all the information we had to remember was easily accessible and we didn't have to be flipping back to the rule book. But those sheets were really helpful, I found, for playing the game. I played as Robin Hood, and I felt like I'd gotten off to a pretty good start because by midway through the first ballad of 3, the game sort of divided up into 3 ballads, although it can end early if certain conditions are achieved. But early in the game, I felt I got off to a pretty decent start. But by the end of that first round, we were back to how the game started, with the Sheriff up 1 victory point, because the game begins with the Sheriff having 1 victory point on that sort of push and pull track that goes back and forth as players gain or lose points, or as your opponent gains points versus you gaining points. It's like a tug-of-war track. Now, by the end of the second ballad, I was having to struggle to avoid an instant loss condition, and on my final turn of that part 2 of the game, I had to put so much thought into how I was going to play it out, or I was going to lose instantly before we even getting to part 3. And then pretty much all of the third ballad, I was just struggling to stay afloat and feeling just really hemmed in by the Sheriff player and not really feeling much hope for a victory, just really trying to stay alive and not lose progress. I couldn't really gain progress, but I was mostly just trying not to lose even more progress. So it was tough to play as the Robin Hood player, and I would really love to both play again as Robin Hood as well as switch sides and try the Sheriff side to explore the game some more. And we were thinking about doing that actually when my brother was here, but there were a couple other games I wanted to get played while he was in town, so we didn't get back to it a second time. Overall, I will say it's a really, really cool design. My initial rating is going to be an 8 out of 10, even though I think it probably deserves a higher score than 8 out of 10 in terms of the overall how well the game is designed. But I just had that feeling of frustration for about 3/4 of the game, especially in the second half of the game, playing as Robin Hood, that hindered my enjoyment slightly, although I was still enjoyed it a lot and still really eager to come back to it. One of the coolest things about this game are the booklets that come with it, where the authors and designers and developers go into the whole history of creating this game, all the research they did about the Robin Hood mythology and the history of it all, and just the really interesting socio-political and even religious elements that came through from the various forms of Robin Hood throughout history, and it was just really, really interesting reading. So all that supplemental stuff that was included with the game, I thought was just incredible. It just really added to my appreciation of the overall design of the game. So yeah, just a really, really well done job to the designer and the developers of this game, definitely. We're getting back to Tolkien with the next game, because next is Lord of the Rings Duel from Middle-earth, which I got to play with Paul again. With this 2-player card-based game, both players are working towards having the most control of the map with their forces, but the game has 3 instant win conditions that in my experience come up more often than actually getting to that full game experience and then checking the map victory. Because in the 3 games now I've played with Paul, what's kind of funny is that in the most recent play that we just played, Paul won an instant victory through his alliances by allying with the different races, playing as Sauron. Whereas in our previous play, Paul, again playing as Sauron, had won a Nazgul instant victory, where the Nazgul had caught the ring bearers, and then the play before that, I had won the board dominance instant victory. So in the 3 times we played the game together, we've managed to cover all 3 instant victory types. It just shows how well balanced the game is. The fact that all 3 victory conditions are generally achievable based on how the game plays out. So such an amazing game. I, in fact, boosted my rating from an 8.5 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, and Paul did the exact same. His previous rating was 8.5 out of 10, and he boosted it to a 9 out of 10. And I mentioned previously when I played with Wyatt gave it a 10 out of 10. So this game overall has been a huge hit. But I still have about 4 games to talk about here that are even better, or even 5 games actually. So the next one here is Sky Team, little cooperative 2-player game of trying to land an airplane that I've been talking about a bunch because Paul and I keep coming back to it. Once again, we played a yellow difficulty airport, which is the second easiest, and we played with the icy runway for the first time. And that's what's really cool about this game, is that it has so many little modules that you can put into the game to switch up the gameplay and the sort of things you're working towards to try to achieve the victory together. And we did manage to pull off a nice smooth landing, so that was fun. I rate the game 9 out of 10. This is a game that Paul gives a perfect 10 out of 10. Evan had given it an 8.5 out of 10 in the past, and our nephew Charlie had given it 8 out of 10. So a big hit game here. Another 2-player card game next is Agent Avenue. I've talked in the past about how awesome this little card game is, how it just plays so quickly. The rules are so simple, but it provides such a fun play experience for 2 players. This is another one I played with my younger brother when he was here for my birthday game day. And what is really quite funny is that it played out pretty much the exact same as when I played this game with Evan for the first time, where we played the first game, my brother lost, he's like, let's play again. We play again, my brother loses again. He's like, let's play again. And so we played about 5 games until, just like Evan, he finally pulled off a victory, and he's like, okay, that's good. So it was pretty funny. And the 6th play, when I finally did lose, I was the one who took the first turn in the game, and somehow I managed to lose on that very first turn of the game, just like my son Wyatt had done in a previous month when I talked about it. Just the way it played out, I kind of messed up and lost on turn 1. But it's a really fun game. I rate it 9 out of 10. I think really highly of the game. My brother didn't rate it that high. He gave it a 6 out of 10. His comments were, it's fun, but he feels that a low variety of cards means it's not too dynamic, which I kind of disagree with. And so I appreciate hearing his perspective on it and how it differs from mine, because I really feel like if you were to water it down with more card types, you are going to really affect the way the game plays out, because it really relies on being able to stack 2 or 3 or more even cards of the same type in order to achieve various effects in the game. So I don't think that adding a more variety of cards would improve the game, but that's, it's interesting to see how our opinions differ on that. Paul in the past has rated the game 8.5 out of 10. Evan, for some reason, gave it a 9.25 out of 10. Wyatt, an 8.5. So, yeah, the rest of us have loved the game quite a lot. Getting back to another game that Paul and I get to very frequently, we have Kingdomino Origins. This time Paul pulled off a win by focusing on a couple of really high-scoring territories and getting some good cave people into play that scored him some big points as well. This is a game where my rating has changed from a 9 up to a 9.5 out of 10, because I see no reason to go lower than that, just with the amount of fun and how simple and quick the game is to play. Paul rates it 9 out of 10, and Evan in the past has given it an 8 out of 10. Now my top 2 of the month. For the life of me, I can't get a decent game of No Limit Texas Hold'em going. So this is one of my all-time favorite games, No Limit Texas Hold'em, in terms of the amount of fun I have playing the game, I think. It's difficult, though, because playing a decent game of Texas Hold'em requires, I would say, about 8 people around the table to get a really good game going. And the past 2 or 3 times I've attempted to get a game going, I've run into the problem that I really only have 2 friends outside of my brothers and family members, and neither of them play poker, so it's really hard to get 8 people together when I don't have friends that play the game. So what has happened, the first bad experience I had in recent years playing this game was trying it on Board Game Arena, playing it heads up, just 2-player with one of my other brothers, and playing it first of all for points instead of money, boring. Playing it on the computer instead of in person, terrible. Playing it 2-player instead of with a large group, kind of fun for a little while, but not that great. So I finally got a chance to sit down with a large group, what turned out to be 10 people, because one of my other brothers has a friend whose friend was hosting this game of Hold'em where they were doing tournament style, so you could be eliminated and then the sort of last person standing got the pot, but they were doing it in such a way where they were raising blinds very quickly. Every time somebody got eliminated, blinds would go up. If we made it all the way around the table with the dealer chipped, blinds would go up. So with that rapidly escalating blind structure, it made for a quick game, which if you're going to play tournament style, that's definitely the way to do it, because if you're the first person to get knocked out of the game, you're not sitting around for half the night waiting for the tournament to finish to get into the next one if you start another one. So it goes by quickly. You're not losing much money at a time with each individual game, because we're only throwing in $10 for a game and then playing through. And they were also basically getting down to the final 2 players and then splitting the pot based on the relative number of chips left between those 2 players, so that made it even quicker, which was all great. But
Tavares, right in the butt? What? No.
The group we were playing with, 2 of the 10 guys there really had no idea how to play No Limit Texas Hold'em. The one guy didn't even realize that, well, he thought 3-pair was better than 2-pair, and 3 pairs is not a thing in Hold'em. And they didn't really know how the betting worked and any of that. So, we're trying to hold their hand and walk them through the play. And then let's see, if there were 10 of us, that would be 2 of them. And so there would be 7 other people besides myself there. Pretty much most of those 7 guys were going hard with the drinks and whatever else they were doing. So it really quickly got to a point where even the people who knew how to play the game weren't necessarily super aware of what was happening. It would sometimes take 5 full minutes to play a single hand because guys were just lost in their own conversations and not really having a hard time keeping track of what was happening. So the quality of the play of the game was awful. And it didn't help that I had come there that evening right after my cancer surgery. So I had my cancer surgery that morning, came back home again, went out that evening to play this game, and the freezing had worn off and my face was in agony. and I was playing with mostly people that I didn't know as well. So I knew a couple of them from interacting in the past, as well as my brother was there too. But it was a situation where I realized if I really tightened up my play and played really solid fundamental Hold'em, I could have probably taken money off of these guys who were drunk and who didn't know how to play the game. But I didn't feel good about that because the whole environment was just there to have a fun evening and you know, sling some cards around. So I played loose and I lost a bit of money. And after 3 rounds of 3 games, I had to call it quits because just a combination of my face hurting, the loud atmosphere, being with people I don't really know very well, not being able to afford to lose much more than a few bucks, and overall not having a great play time with it meant that unfortunately I just had to call it quits and move on. So while I do rate No Limit Texas Hold'em 9.5 out of 10 as a very nearly perfect game for me, and Paul in the past has rated it 8.5 out of 10. This particular play experience certainly wasn't ideal, and I'm still itching to get a good game going with, you know, 7 or so other people who know the game well, but who are there to play well, but also have a good time. The best times I've had are when I've hosted it, when I've been able to get together a handful of people and we've played just cash games where people could buy in or out at any point they wanted to come in or out of the game, where they could, if they started to get low on chips, they could purchase more chips to top up essentially and just play however long they wanted to. Those have been the most fun experiences for me. And in the distant past, I used to have a great group that met about once a month and played tournament style, which was also super fun, but that's long since dissolved. So unfortunately, I'm still looking for a good game of No Limit Texas Hold'em. And then the best game of the month was one of the reasons that I decided not to play a second game of A Gest of Robin Hood when my brother was here. So I played with my brother as well as my 2 sons, Evan and Wyatt. The 4 of us played Les Apaches de Paris, which is a game that one of my Patreon supporters had actually purchased for me from Europe because it was not to be found anywhere here in North America. And this is just a amazing little board game that's an adaptation on one of my other old favorite games, a game called The Boss, where they've taken, The Boss was just kind of a little card-based game. They've taken Les Apaches de Paris, they've put it on a board and switched up the gameplay a bit. It's a very sneaky game where you have certain information that you're having to slowly reveal throughout the course of the game, but you're trying not to give away the most important information to your fellow players. And that's pretty much what I love about this game, is any game where I get to be a little bit sneaky, where there's a bit of subterfuge and trying to figure out what's going on, a little bit of deduction. I just love that sort of thing. So I was the only one who had played the game before, so I did pull off quite a narrow victory. My brother ended up coming in second, and the game was decided by basically my brother pulling a rich person token that gave him the undercover cop instead of a bonus from robbing a certain people. So basically he had a 1 in 4 chance of drawing the bad token, which he did draw, and that was the difference between him winning versus me winning. So it was quite close, but the highlight of the entire game was when my youngest son Wyatt had all the information about one of the specific regions on the board, and so he put some of his gangsters into that region, which made us think, oh, it must be a valuable region. So a bunch of us put our gangsters into the region too, but then before the end of the round, Wyatt basically abandoned the region. His mobsters fled the region, and it turns out that it was a bad reward that was received in that region. One of the winning player of that region got one of their mobsters shot. So he pulled off this little bait and switch where he got us to think that something good was happening, but we ended up getting a mobster assassinated there instead. Because that's the other thing about the game, is the information that you're trying to figure out is whether there's a good reward to be won in each region or a bad thing that might happen to you. So this is a game that I rate a perfect 10 out of 10. It is absolutely my style. I'm so grateful to my Patreon supporter, Asmond is Perfect, who got this game for me. I'm so super excited to have gotten it played again for my birthday. Like I said, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Paul in the past has rated it 7 out of 10, as did my brother when we played it with him there that weekend. Evan has given it an 8 out of 10, and Wyatt gives it a 9.9 out of 10. So again, this is the first time they've played the game, and for Wyatt it was an almost perfect game. He, I think, really enjoyed the sneakiness of it too. So that was my month of May. Please let me know what games you've been playing, what have been some of your favorites recently. Are there any upcoming games that you're excited about? I love to hear all about it, and I really appreciate you watching. Cheers. Five video games. Five video games, 4 of which are new to the channel. The next game that I have, the next or most hours into, is make the each of the maps of there's some stuff that really you need to. I had to sit down before that we played and put together a achievable. It's a fun little game to just